Every Wednesday, William Henry's Revelations bring you a powerful half hour of information at the cutting edge of reality. Information that you cannot find anywhere else in the world. And now, here's William.
Welcome, everyone. There's a lot of buzz in the news lately about a new scientific study that statistically supports the idea that our known universe is actually a grand computer simulation. A new scientific paper published in Cornell University's archive.org site and co-authored by Silas Bean from the University of Bonn reveals strong statistical evidence that our reality is indeed a grand computer simulation. The title of the paper is Constraints on the Universe as a Numerical Simulation. If all this science is correct, it would mean that science has proven the existence of a creator as well as intelligent design. What would be the purpose of intelligently designing a great computer simulation? How does this impact our views on life and death? If you believe the universe really is a computer simulation created by a higher power, then what is our purpose in life? Are we digitized physical beings who possess a non-material consciousness that emanates from outside the simulation? How do we escape the simulation? Then have you heard the news about the Human Brain Project? The Human Brain Project has been officially selected as one of the European Commission's 2 Future and Emerging Technologies flagship projects. This project has been given $1 billion, 1 billion euros, which is about $1.5 billion, to unite European efforts to address one of the greatest challenges of modern science, understanding the human brain. The goal of the Human Brain Project is to pull together our existing knowledge about the brain and to reconstruct the brain piece by piece in supercomputer-based models and simulations. Where are we going with all this? What is this science leading to? Here today to discuss these questions and more, and the related facets of these discoveries, is Frequent Revelations contributor Anthony Peake. Tony has laid foundational steps for us in his books, Is There Life After Death? And The Daemon, which explore some of the greatest secrets of humanity and the functioning of the human mind. In his latest book, The Labyrinth of Time, Tony explores the relationship between consciousness and reality, and in the process puts forward an amazing hypothesis that can explain many enigmatic phenomena, including déjà vu, precognition, near-death experience, and altered states. How do these states and these experiences relate to the computer simulation model? Tony's work also features a cutting-edge account of modern time theory, covering time slips, precognitive dreams, and the elasticity of time during moments of extreme stress, near-death experience, and certain stages of hypnotic trance. The Labyrinth of Time is his latest book, and it's as compelling and persuasive as Tony's other works. Tony's website is anthonypeake.com, and we welcome him to Revelations. Welcome, Tony.
Hello again, William.
Thank you for joining us and taking the time to speak with us today. Tony, some absolutely fascinating news. What are your thoughts?
Oh, totally. And funnily enough, literally today, I received a notification from my publisher about the new book cover of my next book, which will be out in November of this year, called Minefield. And this will be discussing in great detail a lot of the implications of the idea of the universe being a computer simulation. So I'm extremely excited by the fortuitous synchronicity of these announcements. But of course, we know that people like Nick Bostrom and various other individuals have been writing about the idea of a computer simulation for many, many years. So for us within this field, it's not at all surprising, because effectively there is so much evidence for the fact that we are within a computer simulation. You know, there's evidence from various sources. Indeed, I don't know if you're aware, but there were recently, it was announced that they've managed to simulate a very small part of the universe digitally. Now, effectively, although it's only a very, very tiny area, minuscule part of the universe, if we apply Moore's law to computing and computing power, I calculate that probably within 200 to 250 years we'll be able to simulate our own universes anyway.
I mean, this is astounding. I mean, the man on the street hearing this, what do you think the reaction is?
Well, that's the major issue people like you and I have, and many other individuals in this field, is that the man in the street, so much of it is now counterintuitive. And there is an argument to say that because the brain itself is processing reality in a digital way, effectively, in order for an enclosed system like the human brain to understand itself, it's virtually impossible. And because we live in this world that we think we understand, whereas the reality of the fact is that there are so many anomalies within quantum physics, within neurology and everything else, but the man in the street is fed this security system. He's given the security of a science that's 110 years out of date. But he believes in the Newtonian certitude, the idea of what's called materialist reductionism, which is the idea that rather like a car, if you take the bits and pieces from a car, you can understand how the car functions. But of course, reality doesn't work that way, because as we take reality apart, what we actually discover is it's made up of absolutely nothing. And indeed, it's rather analogous, the materialist reductionist argument, I use the analogy that it's rather similar to taking apart a car in order to understand speed, because you're looking at the wrong things.
Right. So we're talking about our reality being the conception of some creator who may only be a couple hundred years in advance of us, evolutionarily speaking, or technology speaking, that maybe within a couple hundred years we'll be able to create a simulated world similar to our own universe.
It gets more complex than that, because if you, as you mentioned earlier on, my book, The Labyrinth of Time, if you take the idea that time itself is an illusion, effectively that time is a human construct, or it is a construct of consciousness itself. And because within quantum physics, for instance, there's no flow of time. Time can flow backwards and forwards. And in effect, from the viewpoint of a photon, time doesn't exist, because a photon, when the first photon's coming out of the Big Bang, effectively this moment and that moment are instantaneous. So effectively, at the speed of light, there is no time. So we have a curious idea that we may have already created this universe ourselves, because effectively, if you go outside of time, the computer simulation could be running outside of time in some way. The simulation runs outside of time, and therefore has always been created. I know it sounds very strange, it's almost like bootstraps theory. Now, I argue in my work that there is very, very strong evidence, and I'll be putting this forward in Mindfield, scientific evidence, hard scientific evidence, that consciousness itself could not only creates the reality around us, but what it's doing is, as you're observing the reality around you, you're collapsing something called the wave function, which is a probability wave. And the act of observation collapses that probability wave into a reality that could be one of a myriad of realities. It's rather similar if you're playing a first-person computer game. In my generation, it was very much Lara Croft and Tomb Raider. Effectively, Lara Croft on the screen has a myriad of opportunities within her life, within the game, because every opportunity and every decision she makes, or the game player makes, is programmed within the hard drive of the computer or within the CD-ROM. Imagine a universe like that. And again, this is not crazy stuff. There was a paper published, I think, in 2007 or 2008 by Stephen Hawking and his associate Thomas Hertog from CERN. And they have something called the top-down hypothesis of particle physics. And again, this is Stephen Hawking, one of the world's leading theoretical physicists. And his model suggests that literally every outcome of every decision is already digitally programmed within something. And by our act of observation and by our choices, we collapse that particular reality. But had we made a different decision, another reality would have collapsed. So effectively, all of us are collapsing our own realities as we move through. Now, we could then extrapolate from that and take the hypothesis of somebody called Professor Bernard Hayes. And Hayes is a cosmologist based at Menlo Park in California. And he is working on something he calls the God theory. And in the God theory, he suggests that effectively God is everybody. We are collectively all one entity experiencing itself subjectively, as Bill Hicks once said, the famous American comedian. And the idea is that, in fact, we are the mind of God and God is us. So therefore, we effectively create the computer program and exist within the computer program. So it gets extremely complex and somehow very, very comforting, if this is the idea.
Well, yeah. I mean, what comes into my mind is that fundamental Christian teaching is that God is love. So maybe the simulation is all about love, and it's all about learning to drop our obsession with material things that are figments of our imagination in the beginning, or to begin with, right? If we're living in a simulation, I mean, nothing is actually quote-unquote real, and live our life as if we are God and love everyone.
Well, interestingly enough on that, I don't know if you've come across the work of Tom Campbell. He was a NASA physicist, and he's written a book a few years ago called My Big Toe.
Oh, right, yes,
Campbell
of course.
was one of the research scientists that worked with Robert Monroe in the Monroe Institute. And in My Big Toe, Tom suggests that love is exactly what we're talking about. Effectively, love is the positive value within the universe, and effectively it's allied to entropy. And effectively, the more love there is within a system, for want of a better term, the more effective it works. So therefore, it does make you sort of realize that spirituality and science are now coming much closer together with this kind of over-theory about what the nature of consciousness is. Consciousness is central to reality, and reality is simply an extrapolation of consciousness.
So how does news of discoveries such as this change your work, Tony, especially as relates to the work you've done on the near-death experience, the Eidolon, and the possibility that there's infinite versions of ourselves?
Oh, this very much fills in completely with it. I mean, one of the things that I find absolutely amazing is how, the 8 years since I wrote my first book, and by the way, there's another book you missed out there, The Out-of-Body Experience, the history of science, astral travel, which has proved extremely popular, both nationally and internationally. And in that book, I'm suggesting an even wider model where I've taken the idea of consciousness, the idea of the way in something called the zero-point field, the quantum vacuum, and the idea of how all this is drawn up. And what is happening now is my idea and my hypothesis seems to be being vindicated by science almost continually. It's almost uncanny. But then again, if this is my universe, this is exactly how it should be.
Well, exactly, God. I mean...
because effectively, I do find it quite surprising how, I came up with these ideas a few years ago, and they do seem to be being vindicated time and time again. I get extremely excited about it.
Well, what do we do with them now, Tony? I mean, now we know we're walking around in a simulation. This is all really just kind of this big, giant game. We're in the mind of some vastly intelligent being who loves us, who has created a universe of love. How does that change my Tuesday afternoon here?
Well, you still realize that you have a responsibility within this universe. Now, effectively, if you apply what I call my cheating ferryman hypothesis, which was postulated in my first book, the idea is that you will live your life many, many times within the computer game. In other words, if we are in a computer simulation, and your life is a computer simulation, it effectively means you're living in a groundhog life, in which case every outcome of every decision you can make is programmed within the grand computer, within the zero-point field of information. And recorded, effectively, yes. So in which case, it's a recording we're existing within.
Judgment Day is very real then, isn't it?
I'm sorry?
Judgment Day then is a very real experience when we will be...
Oh, totally. Because what you're really doing here is you're living your life many, many times. And in doing so, you're in trying to live the perfect life, as Phil Connors does in the movie Groundhog Day. So in which case, it's rather like Lara Croft again in Tomb Raider. Effectively, by the end of Tomb Raider, when you've played it and got through the whole game, Lara has lived the perfect life and has made every right decision. And when she does that, she becomes an evolved being. This is very much the Buddhist concept. Effectively, we're living in a bardo state. And within the bardo state, we are looking for perfection. We're looking to be a Buddha. We're looking to be a perfected individual. So by living our life over and over again, we eventually will live a life that we will do good for doing good's sake. Again, as Connors does in the movie Groundhog Day. He does, at the end of the movie, he does good for doing good's sake. So what we're doing is we are living our own life, and in it we learn, and we learn by our mistakes.
And we learn to become perfect beings who can then create our own perfect universe.
Correct. Or then the mystery is, when we become a perfect being, it's rather like in Buddhism, when you become your own Buddha, what you do is effectively you go into that position, don't you, of non-mind. You go into that position where you become part of the greater something. And that's the realization that you are part of God, and God is you, and God is within you. But even within the Christian ethos, if you read John, there's so much messages there about the Logos, the Word of God, and exactly the way God is within us all. And this is the message of all the major religions. That's the one universal message. And again, if you look into the Gnostic traditions and the Kabbalah, and you look into the Sufi Abrahamic religions, you will find this general theme all the time. Look for God within. I am within you.
Tony, I hate you, but we're going to have to take a short break. And I say that kind of haltingly because time doesn't exist, and the break doesn't exist either, but we're still going to take it. So we'll be right back with Tony Peak.
An Unknown Country subscription opens a door into a world of mystery and information. Over 200 special interviews where our guests open the doors of their minds to our subscribers. A Dreamland archive going back to 2004. Plus Whitley's Room, where you will find his talks on The Key and The Path, his original communion hypnosis sessions, audio versions of many of his books, the inspiring talks on the Bible as you have never heard it discussed before, and above all, his beautiful, inspiring meditations. More special material for subscribers every week. $12.95 gets you 3 months of wonder. Plus, you can subscribe online or by mail.
And don't miss on Free Dreamland this week, John Hogue tells us the significance of the resignation of Pope Benedict. He's the last pope save one in the prophecy of St. Malachi. What does this mean? And for UnknownCountry.com subscribers, we go deeper. John describes for us what the apocalyptic vision of these times meant to the prophets who first uttered it. What does it mean, apocalypse? Is it the end or a new revelation?
Solar storms are becoming the greatest danger that we face, and hardly anybody realizes it. In this riveting new electronic book, Solar Flares, Whitley Strieber tells us that the sun hasn't changed, but we have, and our electric grids have become larger and more sensitive. Find out just where the danger lies and what we can do about it. For once, a major problem has a straightforward solution. But Congress needs to pass a bill, and you need to make that happen. Solar Flares, available for your Kindle, Nook, and iPad for just $3.99. Act today. Let's get Congress moving before the sun shuts us down.
This is Revelations. We're continuing with Tony Peak. Tony, just before the break, we were talking about the attainment of perfection, and you also mentioned your Cheating the Ferryman work. And I wanted to ask you, I was recently looking at some works on the ancient Anunnaki of Sumeria. Are you familiar with the Anunnaki?
Oh, very much. I feature these in my next book.
Okay, great.
How creepy. This is, again, synchronicity, isn't it?
That's great. So I just had this intuition. I needed to talk with Tony today, and I wanted to talk with you about this, but I also wanted to ask you about the Anunnaki as the ferrymen, because one of the, and that's F-E-R-R-Y men, not fairy, F-A-R-Y. One of the definitions of the word Nibiru, which is supposed to be the realm that the Anunnaki hail from, is it's the realm of the ferrymen, and the Anunnaki themselves are referred to as the ferrymen. And at one level of interpretation anyway, at least the Sumerians asked us to consider that the Anunnaki were actually spirit beings, non-physical, ephemeral beings. My question is, in light of what we're talking about, could the Anunnaki and beings such as them, spirit beings, maybe even angels, be sort of agents of the program that are here to assist, or how do you view beings such as that?
You hit the nail on the head. This is exactly where I go with Mindfield. In Mindfield, I take my reader on a journey along the Silk Road from the coast of the Middle East right across to the South China Sea. And what I do along that route is I actually trace certain belief systems and how the belief systems seem to come out of ancient Sumeria. And the way in which the Anakai and the concept of the Anakai, and the concept of the Anakai, of course, are these kind of snake-like people. Now, if you actually go back to the teachings of Sumer, and you see how that seeded the teachings in ancient Egypt and everything else, you suddenly start to realize it's DNA. And effectively what we're talking about when we talk about the Anakai, what we're talking about is DNA, the snake within. We start looking into this, and you suddenly find there's phenomenal links, Kundalini experiences, the idea of a snake going up the spine, the Pingala and such like. Now, I think this all links to one tiny organ in the center of the brain called the pineal gland. And I think the pineal gland is that point where we touch infinity. And I believe the pineal gland does this through DNA and through what's called biophotons. Biophotons are light that's actually given off by cells. They found that not only this light is it's an internal light, and it's the light you see in dreams. This internal light is generated by DNA. So DNA helps us to move through. We are effectively, God is DNA, DNA is God. It's the same kind of principle.
But Tony, could those biophotons be equivalent to, say, the pixels that make up the reality, the pixels that make up our computer screen?
Exactly. The internal computer screen, the pixels are biophotons. It's very much, it has an elaborate, a wonderfully logical position to this. You know, when I was writing the book, I became more and more excited to the point, you know, where my mouth was going dry sometimes because the links I was making just blew my mind. And I was thinking, my God, this is just fantastic stuff. And I kept thinking, where on earth is it coming from? As if I was always channeling it. You know, it was just, I was finding the information I needed. And I expand upon this now to even mystical traditions and how the mystical traditions believed in this. But I also do the neurology. So, you know, I think that the pineal gland generates internally, that is endogenously generated dimethyltryptamine. And dimethyltryptamine is, DMT, is the God molecule. It's the molecule that the brain itself stimulates. And of course we know it's the major constituent of ayahuasca. Now again, so suddenly we're getting into some very interesting areas. And I know, again, I'm writing a book. My next book, by the way, will be a biography of Philip K. Dick, the American science fiction writer. And I'm writing this, I've been writing this today, and I've been making links here with Philip K. Dick's experiences and his exegesis. Because if you read that and you look at some of the pictures that Philip K. Dick put in there, and Whitley better look at this if he hasn't already, because you look at the pictures of the being Philip K. Dick called Zebra. It's Whitley's visitors.
Incredible.
Exactly the same being. And again, I think these beings are the Anakai. And it's the way in which they manifest within our three-dimensional reality.
So let me ask you this. We talked in the introduction, or I did, about the Human Brain Project and €1 billion being devoted to figuring out how the brain works and to simulating the brain. How does that figure into this, Tony? And do you think that scientists will acknowledge, affirm, and ultimately begin to promote the concepts you're discussing here?
Well, I'm hoping so, because the problem science has, it's something called the hard problem of consciousness, and it was first suggested by an Australian philosopher called David Chalmers. And Chalmers argues quite specifically that the major problem modern science has, the biggest problem modern science has, is how effectively inanimate matter, charged with electrical impulses within the brain, creates the concept of William Henry, Anthony Peake, and Whitley Strieber. How does it do that? It's a huge logical leap. You know, we're not even at the first steps of this. So what we need to be doing is thinking outside of the box and breaking away from the straitjackets of materialist reductionism and saying, let's just look at the brain. Let's just see how the brain works. And if you start breaking into the brain, you realize that what the brain is, it's like any other substance in this universe. It's actually made up of electrons. It's made up of quarks in exactly the same way, which is, again, 99.9999% empty space. when we start to realize this, we'll start to realize that by looking inward, we start to look outward. And I think this brain project will be the first step. But the problem is that out there, so many scientists are dependent upon tenure. They can't take the risk. I know, I interview these guys. I'm interviewing quantum physicists next week. And the danger is that they don't want to be seen taking this side. But I always argue that every single scientist out there, however much materialist they are, they know there's a mystery inside their head, or wherever our consciousness is located, because their science cannot explain consciousness.
It goes beyond the brain, though, too, Tony, because we know that in the coming years, neuroscience, nanotechnology, genetic science, and computer science are all going to converge into one unified science that, or one discipline that will converge on human skin, and they'll all collapse into this one technology that will be this new skin for humanity, and this will represent the next human. Yeah. I wonder if this next human might be better suited to interact with the simulation, or if it might be, in fact, a detriment to, that would be another reason why humanity does not want to start sticking chips up its bum or in the pineal gland or all the other places Apple, Microsoft, Google are chomping at the bit to do to us. What are your thoughts on the development of technology?
That what is happening is our technology is running faster than our ability to understand the technology. And I think we need to step back a little bit and just start to realize exactly what is happening. I think that we need to become philosophers again. We need to start thinking philosophically and looking inwardly as to what it is to be human, what it is to be conscious. All these things are very, very closely related and powerfully related. I think it's a profoundly exciting time, but as you say, it's profoundly dangerous. But then again, if there is an overall control to this, if we are part of a greater something, that greater something knows where we're going. Because again, effectively, if it's all planned, if it has what's called a teleological outcome, in other words, that everything is progressing to something, and everybody knows what that outcome is, it's part of the process, if that makes sense.
It's just a mind-bending concept to try to wrap your head around, and it does make me wonder. I mean, we're talking about science that now is in the open literature, and as so many people in the UFO community believe, and as I do, the black ops people, the governments, they've probably known what we're talking about here for, a couple of decades maybe?
Yep. I think it will be that quick because Moore's law is slowing down now in the sense that the capacity and the computing capacity now I think is doubling every 3 years and every 2 years. But nevertheless, we still have the capacity to start really understanding and modeling the reality we live within. But then again, you realize that the brain models reality every second that you use your senses. Because, of course, all your brain is doing is internally creating a facsimile of an external world. It's a facsimile. It's nothing more. You know, it's effectively one of the things that amazes me, and I make people think about this sometimes, is that even the photons that are actually hitting your eye and hitting your retina are not the same photons that enter your brain. Because, of course, what happens with a photon is it hits an electron and makes the electron change levels within the atom, and it fires off another photon. So, for instance, you look out of a window now, the light that is hitting one side of the window is not the same light that's entering your eye. And that's a very, very interesting concept.
It seems, Tony, that every generation or maybe every 100 years or so, our concept of the creator changes as we gain more and more knowledge. Do you think that this is the ultimate knowledge here, or maybe 10 years from now we'll look back at this and go, boy, that was as backward as Newton?
Who knows? I would suspect probably so. I think that, I think we're on the first few steps of a wonderful, wonderful journey of understanding that the universe is enfolded within itself, as David Bohm, the great Anglo-American quantum physicist, said. It's enfolded, so consciousness, the universe are all aspects of the same thing. And then we look back to the ancient belief systems of Buddhism, the Tao, and various other belief systems, and we suddenly realize that these are ancient teachings, and we've been misinterpreting them because we using the wrong language. You know, we are interpreting them within the language that we speak.
And so what are some good words, then, we can start working into our vocabulary that might put us more in resonance or at our higher vibration as concerns these concepts?
I always love the book concept of cosmic consciousness. I've always liked that, and it's the idea, you know, that the consciousness resonates at a completely different level, and these kind of things. But I think we do need to bring out a new nomenclature. We need to have new terms to use to explain the inexplicable, almost, without necessarily being obscure, because, of course, that's the danger. But we're dealing with things that language is inadequate to explain. I mean, people tell me when they have near-death experiences that they cannot describe the things they see, because, of course, they're looking again at the world of the inner light. They're
right.
seeing biophotons, they're seeing photons coming up, so the things they see are so totally amazing as to be unbelievable, literally.
It's incredible. And then you just wonder what could be the ultimate power of hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people suddenly getting this concept and unifying. We could easily just change the hologram, couldn't we?
Totally. That's always the thing I thought, is that more and more people, it's going back to the old transcendental meditation arguments, isn't it? You know, that if enough people start to resonate in the same way and think in the same way, and you just wonder if we all can control our reality, suddenly the reality will change. We'll break out of what Philip K. Dick called the Black Iron Prison, and we'll move to what he called the Palm Tree Garden, the reality behind the reality. The Gnostics term the pleroma, the place that's behind this prison of physical, the illusion of physicality. Again, what the Hindus would call Maya. It's an illusion, and we need to break out of the illusion. But we are like a sprite on a computer screen. Lara Croft, when she realizes she's in a computer program, will realize that she's being manipulated and moved by a game player. And, of course, then the whole game changes, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Then you get up to the next layer of the game, don't you?
Yes, absolutely.
And maybe this is just-in-time information at this time, when so many people are talking about global tyranny and the possibility of governments being able to massively manipulate and control us even more than they have been able to before. Maybe, you know, this is just the game changer we've been waiting for. And it makes me wonder, too, Tony. I mean, it's like I've been doing a lot of research and talking quite a bit about Islam and its belief in a messianic figure, the Mahdi, and then Christians, of course, believe in a second coming of Jesus. And, of course, the Jews await a Messiah, and other religions await their own messianic-type figures. And it seems to me that these figures, when they show up, they better not be walking around in white linen and sandals. And we can't look for simpletons anymore. We've got to be looking for people that have at least this amount of knowledge and can explain it to us in an extraordinary way as never before.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing, again, we're misinterpreting exactly what we mean by any kind of messianic figure, and exactly what we mean when we talk about great changes. You know, effectively, these changes will be like nothing we've ever understood, and that's the way it should be.
Right.
It should come as a complete surprise to us, because we are like babes, you know, and we think like children. But one day, we're suddenly going to realize that this is something absolutely wonderful and absolutely fantastic, and we're part of it.
It is wonderful.
I mean, I've moved from being an atheist to being an agnostic to being what I would call probably a panpsychist, in the sense the idea that everything is one. And it's been a wonderful journey for me to move away from that, because it gives me a much greater feeling of security within the universe. It's suddenly not, as Shakespeare said, you know, a huge game meaning nothing at all. It's not. It's part of a much greater plan, and it's much more complex than you can ever believe.
And we're all its players. And as you're talking, Tony, I'm getting a picture here of kind of the role that I feel that you play. You know, before we fed our babies jarred baby food, a mother used to take maybe a piece of steak or a piece of chicken, and she would chew it up and then until it was nice and soft, and then she would give it to her child. And it seems to me that's kind of your role, Tony. You're able to take this massively complex information, chew it up a little bit for us, and give it to us in a way that's very palatable, digestible, and so we can handle it. And I thank you for the incredible work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to get it out there, because it's important. And I feel, that I'm driven to get these ideas across. It's so important to me.
Well, I think you're maybe just a little bit more than driven, Tony. I think you're a very important messenger, and I thank you once again for giving us all the time that you give us here on Revelations.
I'm delighted to, anytime, William.
Okay, Tony. Well, listen, I'm going to call on you again here soon as this news starts developing, and want to wish you the best of luck with your book projects, and we'll look very much forward to hearing about those once they're ready.
Absolutely, William. That's wonderful. Great to talk to you.
You too, as always.
Okay,
This has been Revelations. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next time.
Attending a William Henry presentation is unforgettable. Keep up with his schedule at williamhenry.net. You've been listening to William Henry's Revelations on Dreamland Radio. Next Wednesday, another cutting-edge revelation from William Henry.
Designing a great computer simulation? How does this impact our views on life and death? If you believe the universe really is a computer simulation created by a higher power, then what is our purpose in life? Are we digitized physical beings who possess a non-material consciousness that emanates from outside the simulation? How do we escape the simulation? Then have you heard the news about the Human Brain Project? The Human Brain Project has been officially selected as one of the European Commission's 2 Future and Emerging Technologies flagship projects. This project has been given $1 billion, €1 billion, which is about $1.5 billion, to unite European efforts to address one of the greatest challenges of modern science, understanding the human brain. The goal of the Human Brain Project is to pull together our existing knowledge about the brain and to reconstruct the brain piece by piece in supercomputer-based models and simulations.
Every Wednesday, William Henry's Revelations bring you a powerful half hour of information at the cutting edge of reality. Information that you cannot find anywhere else in the world. And now, here's William.
Welcome, everyone. There's a lot of buzz in the news lately about a new scientific study that statistically supports the idea that our known universe is actually a grand computer simulation. A new scientific paper published in Cornell University's archive.org site and co-authored by Silas Bean from the University of Bonn reveals strong statistical evidence that our reality is indeed a grand computer simulation. The title of the paper is Constraints on the Universe as a Numerical Simulation. If all this science is correct, it would mean that science has proven the existence of a creator as well as intelligent design. What would be the purpose of intelligently decisions? Where are we going with all this? What is this science leading to? Here today to discuss these questions and more, and the related facets of these discoveries, is frequent Revelations contributor Anthony Peake. Tony has laid foundational steps for us in his books, Is There Life After Death? And The Daemon, which explore some of the greatest secrets of humanity and the functioning of the human mind. In his latest book, The Labyrinth of Time, Tony explores the relationship between consciousness and reality, and in the process puts forward an amazing hypothesis that can explain many enigmatic phenomena, including déjà vu, precognition, near-death experience, and altered states. How do these states and these experiences relate to the computer simulation model? Tony's work also features a cutting-edge account of modern time theory, covering time slips, precognitive dreams, and the elasticity of time during moments of extreme stress, near-death experience, and certain stages of hypnotic trance. The Labyrinth of Time is his latest book, and it's as compelling and persuasive as Tony's other works. Tony's website is anthonypeake.com, and we welcome him to Revelations. Welcome, Tony.
Hello again, William.
Thank you for joining us and taking the time to speak with us today. Tony, some absolutely fascinating news. What are your thoughts?
Oh, totally. And funnily enough, literally today, I received a notification from my publisher about the new book cover of my next book, which will be out in November of this year, called Minefield. And this will be discussing in great detail a lot of the implications of the idea of the universe being a computer simulation. So I'm extremely excited by the fortuitous synchronicity of these announcements. But of course, we know that people like Nick Bostrom and various other individuals have been writing about the idea of the computer simulation for many, many years. So for us within this field, it's not at all surprising, because effectively there is so much evidence for the fact that we are within a computer simulation. You know, there's evidence from various sources. Indeed, I don't know if you're aware, but there were recently, it was announced that they've managed to simulate a very small part of the universe digitally. Now, effectively, although it's only a very, very tiny area, minuscule part of the universe, if we apply Moore's law to computing and computing power, I calculate that probably within 200 to 250 years we'll be able to simulate our own universes anyway.
I mean, this is astounding. I mean, the man on the street hearing this, what do you think the reaction is?
Well, that's the major issue people like you and I have, and many other individuals in this field, is that the man in the street, so much of it is now counterintuitive. And there is an argument to say that because the brain itself is processing reality in a digital way, effectively, in order for an enclosed system like the human brain to understand itself, it's virtually